wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Shafia binti Abu Bakar. My student ID is 209258992. I'm from class J4EM 1103A. The slider and crank system is used to convert a rotational to a straight line motion. This system consists of three important parts. The first part is a crank, which is a rotating disc. The second part is a slider, which slides on a fixed plane. And the last part is the rod, which connects the crank with the slider. How this system works is when the crank rotates in a circular motion, the slider will also move, except the slider will move in a linear motion back and forth at the fixed plane. Both of these will move at the same time because of the connecting rod that connects to the knob of the crank and the slider. Both results from the theoretical and experimental tables are different, although it is not that much of a difference. The value from the experimental table is slightly larger than the value from the theoretical table. Based on the information, the theory for the experiment is as accurate as the final result of the experiment. One of the errors that can be identified from the experiment are systematic error, that is, deal with the value on the measuring equipment on the right eye level, and this could cause to get an inaccurate value. The second error is did not put the crank onto the correct degree value properly, and this could cause to get the wrong value in the end. The third error is not tighten the rod onto the crank and the slider properly to cause it to be loose. The last error is not getting the average value for the displacement. These are some of the practical applications of crank and slider. Reciprocating engine, that is an engine consists of one or more pistons that converts pressure into a rotational motion. Oscillating cylinder steam engine, that is a simple steam engine design that required no valve gear. And lastly, a hand pump, that are manually operated pumps which it use human power and mechanical advantages to move fluids or air from one place to another. Overall, the objective for the experiment was to understand more about planar kinematic motion and to understand the effect of changing the crank radius and the connecting rod length. Those objectives were achieved. The first objective was obtained by seeing the crank and slider moves in a fixed motion. The crank moves in a circular motion, while the slider moves in a linear motion. From this information, the type of planar kinematic motion for the crank and slider mechanism is a general planar motion. That is a combination of translation and rotation. Second objective was obtained from the result. The length of the rod does not change the value of displacement because the displacement for each rod are almost the same value, while each radius does give a different value for displacement. One precaution that can be used for this experiment is always handle the equipment properly. Don't turn the crank too fast or put too much force on it because it could break if it doesn't handle with care. Always try to use every equipment in the proper way and follow the rules that needed to be followed. For example, lock the rod properly and tightly for it to stay on the slider and the crank.